This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. During the offseason, we have this tendency to look at our team or whatever team you root for in a vacuum. Okay, we were this good last year. We're going to add some running backs and we're going to be better than ever. But everybody is looking at their team like that at this point, right? Everybody's trying to add players. Everybody's trying to get better. Everybody's doing more to be more, which means that your projection can't just be simply, we were better than we were last year. We should be better. But how far does that go? Do we take it too far? Do we overrate the improvements that teams make? This is another thing that I've talked about. Sometimes we think just because a team has done a bunch of stuff in free agency that they've automatically gotten better. We've been on both sides of this, where the Browns did a bunch of stuff and people thought that the team was going to be great, and it wasn't. And then we've had off seasons where the Browns did some smaller stuff in free agency, not the big splashy stuff. And they ended up having pretty good seasons, right? That's what 2020 was. Even last year, right, where the Browns didn't really make that many big splashes. I know they brought in Zadarius Smith, but they weren't spending the most money in free agency that year. But they had themselves a pretty solid season despite the fact that they didn't do it. And that's what I tend to try to be wary of, right? There's going to be teams that people get extremely excited over because they're making a ton of signings, but that excitement tends to be very fast. And sometimes in that excitement, we miss some small details that are very important. So what this video is going to be about is talking about the contenders in the AFC and how the Browns stack up to the rest of the contenders, given what they've done in free agency and given what other teams have done in free agency. Now, in my mind, when I think of real, legitimate contenders in the AFC, like teams that I know for multiple years, they have been in that conversation. Those are the last three teams to be in the AFC Championship. The Baltimore Ravens, obviously the Kansas City Chiefs, and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I know the Bengals finishing last place this year. Joe Burrow got hurt. We'll see how serious that injury is. But if Joe Burrow's healthy, and maybe they have T. Higgins, maybe they don't, still have Jamar Chase, still got Joe Burrow, until they aren't in that conversation, they are in that conversation with the healthy Joe Burrow. Baltimore obviously deserves to be in that conversation. They've been a very good team over the last 4 years, and Lamar Jackson has won 2 MVPs in that period. And then obviously Kansas City, they're back-to-back champions. Pat Mahomes, 3-time champion. Those are the 3 real contenders in the AFC. Everybody else, like, there's some kind of pretenders, right? I got Houston in the kind of pretenders list. I got Buffalo in the kind of pretenders list. I got, Miami in the kind of contenders list. My bad if I called them pretenders, contenders list. And then I got a team that I think is interesting, like the New York Jets, where I'm like, what are they actually doing? Like, I don't know. But let's talk about the contenders first. I think a lot of people looked at Baltimore and they saw that they signed Derrick Henry. And I think people got a little carried away. Now, do I think Derrick Henry's going to be outright bad for Baltimore? No, he's going to be a fine running back, right? Like, he's probably going to get 800, 900, maybe 1,000 yards. But, I think he's going to be a fine running back. Is he going to be the Derrick Henry of old? I doubt it. I mean, he was barely the Derrick Henry of old at times last year. The thing with Derrick Henry that I point to is when you look at running backs who might not age well, it's usually the running backs who have a more elongated style that tend to age poorly. And Derrick Henry is on the list of running backs where I'm like, I don't know how that's going to age past like his 30th year. And what I mean by that is Derrick Henry likes to string runs out to get downhill so he can hit his full acceleration. We've known this. We've heard people say this. If you can get to Derrick Henry before he gets downhill, he's not that difficult to tackle. It's only when he gets downhill where it becomes issues. And that's an important qualifier that people point out. I know people, especially now Baltimore fans, because now they have to defend Derrick Henry's legacy or whatever it is, that they feel like is being attacked. But that's a really important qualifier that you've heard everybody who's played in the NFL and tackled Derrick Henry kind of put up in the context of saying Derrick Henry is not as difficult to tackle as y'all think. It's just about when you get to him. It's serious, right? Ryan Clark has said it. We've heard people on Baltimore's team say it. Like, it's a real thing. And the issue with that is the older Derrick Henry gets, this is just the laws of physics. The older Derrick Henry gets, the longer it's going to take for him to get accelerated to the point to where he's moving downhill. And the longer that period is between Derrick Henry accelerating and getting downhill and Derrick Henry starting and getting the ball, the longer that period is, the easier it is to tackle Derrick Henry. That's been my main point, is that guy's tackle window is going to get wider and wider as he gets older. And we've seen this when a team like the Browns played Derrick Henry this year against the Titans, where Miles is able to dominate the line of scrimmage, where the Browns are able to have these fast linebackers that can get to the ball really quickly. Like, if you can get to that point before Derrick Henry can, if you have athletes at safety, linebacker, and edge, you can. He's not that big of a threat. And that's only going to be a bigger and bigger problem as he gets older, because Derrick Henry's a great athlete, but he's not going to outrun Father Time. And his style would concern me. Another thing that I do have a little bit of a concern about when it comes to Derrick Henry, and just this Baltimore team in general, is they really invested in running back. But I don't know about you. When I've watched the Baltimore Ravens play, I have not once thought, you know what they need? A better running back. Like, since they've gotten Lamar Jackson, I have not once thought that running back was their issue. And this kind of goes along with, like, I think people's frustrations with Baltimore as a contender is that they seem to not get what they need. Like, it took them forever to move off of Greg Roman. They move off of Greg Roman. They finally go to something where Lamar can shine more as a passer, and you give him Odell Beckham. Like, you look like you're kind of giving him wide receiver pieces, and maybe you feel better about that. But then a year like this comes along, and you look at that wide receiver room, and you like, are they bringing back, is Nelson Aguilar going to be the best wide receiver on this team outside of Zay Flowers? Like, is that what they're doing again? Like, how fundamentally different is what they have now, where it's Zay Flowers and who else pretty much playing wide receiver for him? How much different is that than when they had Pookie Brown, Hollywood Brown out there and nobody else? They've had the same issues at wide receivers. Every single year, Lamar Jackson has been there, and they have not tried to get a 50-50 ball guy. Lamar likes to attack downfield. You don't got a 50-50 ball guy. Why? Mark Andrews is starting to decline a little bit. Okay, let's get somebody to take some of that responsibility. No, we're going to sign Odell Beckham. Now you're not even bringing back Odell Beckham. I think you're bringing back Nelson Aguilar. Like, that's really the plan at wide receiver. That's really questionable to me. And they lost Geno Stone and Pat Queen, who I think are bigger losses than I think people really know. Pat Queen especially, because when you look at the production, right? And I know people are going to tell me Roquan Smith does a different job, but the production from the linebacker position came from Pat Queen. Now, people are going to act like Roquan Smith is solely responsible for everything that Pat Queen did, like he had a remote control up Pat Queen's ass or something like that. But Pat Queen was responsible for a lot of that production. And you don't have it. And when you're a team like the Baltimore Ravens, who like to get this production by committee, right? They don't get their sack production by one player. It's not just going to be Justin Madubuike getting 17 sacks like it is in Cleveland with Myles Garrett or something like that, or Pittsburgh with TJ Watt. Their production comes by a committee. Pat Queen going to get like 6 of them. Then you got to look at one of the edges. You hope one of your edges get about 6. The other one gets like 3, 4, 5. Then you got an interior guy. You hope he gets 8. And then you have a guy like Kyle Hamilton that you want to get 5. Like, their pressure production comes from a committee. And Pat Queen was a really important part to that committee. Now, I don't know if the plan is to replace him with Trenton Simpson, who I like, but I don't know if he's a linebacker more than he's a box safety. But I don't know what Baltimore's plans are with him. But you do got to replace that production by Pat Queen. And I would like to remind people, like people who think that Pat Queen's production was only because of Roquan Smith. Look at somebody like J.O.K. First couple of years up and down. You saw the potential, similar to a Pat Queen. You saw the potential, but it was up and down. And then in year 3, halfway through it, the guy figures it out. Now, that wasn't due to the leadership of Anthony Walker. It's just he naturally figured out the linebacker position about 2.5 years into it. Now, Roquan Smith happened to come along about 2.5 years into Pat Queen's career. So people are giving all of the credit to Roquan Smith for his improvement. And I'm sure Roquan helped. He's a veteran player. He's somebody who is very good at the job that he's asked to do. Not as good as people think, but very good at his job. So obviously that kind of presence would be helpful to Pat Queen, but I don't know if it's as transformative as people make it out to be, because I think if Pat Queen never got Roquan next to him, he would have made the same leap because he's a good player. And they lost a really good player at linebacker now. They lost him to keep a really good player at D-tackle, but they lost him. And I don't know what the plan is to replace him, because I do think he proved a vital role for them when it comes to the playmaking of that linebacker position, because Roquan Smith, not really a playmaker. Like, y'all can get mad at me all y'all want about saying that. He's not really a playmaker. He's never in the top of any of the playmaking stats. He doesn't get TFLs. He doesn't get tackles. Like, he's not a playmaker. He's a what? Play shepherd? He shepherds people to the play is what people describe his role as, right? As a Mike linebacker. $19 million for that, by the way. But yeah, I think losing Pat Queen is going to actually be something significant. And I don't know if adding Derrick Henry really changes anything about Baltimore. Like, he's just going to be another running back there that's going to get 800, 900 yards. But it's Lamar's show, and it makes no sense to me that the Baltimore Ravens aren't interested in investing at the wide receiver position like they are at running back. Like, I think Baltimore would be a much better team if they spent $12 million on Mike Williams than if they spent that same $12 million on Derrick Henry. Like, it's going to get everybody going. People going to get all hyped up about it, and people going to make their little TikTok fan cams about it. But I don't think it really makes the Ravens that better. Like, I don't think to myself, man, the Ravens would have beat the Chiefs last year if they had Derrick Henry. Running the ball ain't been the issue. Their wide receivers' inability to get open in important parts of the game, that's been the issue for Baltimore for years. But they haven't done anything about it. Cincinnati. Maybe they do something about it in the draft. I know somebody's going to bring that up, a Raven fan. They're going to bring up that the Ravens could do something in the draft. That's true. But come on, man. I've seen your track record. I'm not moved. Like, I'm not moved by the Baltimore Ravens drafting somebody in the late first round or maybe the second round and thinking that's going to solve the problem. If that solved the problem, we wouldn't be here talking about a problem that's existed since Lamar Jackson's been in the NFL. You've been trying to draft wide receivers around him. It was supposed to be Devin Duvernay. It was supposed to be James Prochet. It was supposed to be this guy. It's supposed to be Rashad Bateman. Then we get to now, and what is it? It's supposed to be Marquise Brown. Like, the draft has clearly not been a useful way for the Baltimore Ravens to bring in wide receivers. And if that's the big plan, to get more wide receivers on the team, I don't know, man. I think I know where that story's going. Cincinnati. I think Cincinnati got better. It depends on what happens with this T. Higgins thing. But I do think that this T. Higgins thing is more of a win-win for Cincinnati than a lot of people in Cleveland want to admit. Let's start with some of the smaller stuff. They brought in Zach Moss. I think that's a fine pickup. I always wasn't enthusiastic with the production and body of work of Joe Mixon. I understand that Joe Mixon has a higher ceiling. So like in a game, like Joe Mixon has the ability to take over, Zach Moss doesn't. But the Bengals don't run anybody to the point to where they're allowed to take over. So Zach Moss is fine. Mike Gesicki, I think that's a very good, smart move. Reliable tight end. He's going to be fine for him. They don't really use a tight end that much. Again, peripheral moves for positions that are on the peripheral of the Cincinnati Bengals offense, right? They don't really use running back that much. They don't really use tight end that much. It is what it is. Sheldon Rankins. They spent a lot of money on him to replace DJ Reader. And I think that was a fine move. I think DJ Reader, they probably could have just brought him back, but they wanted to get a little bit younger and spend some money on it. So they went after Sheldon Rankins, and they can afford it. It's a little high, or at least a little higher than I thought he would go, but they can afford it. It's fine. Adding Geno Stone and bringing back Von Bell is big. And here's the thing I think people forget so much about the Cincinnati Bengals. Yes, Joe Burrow is the big star, and Jamar Chase is the second big star. But the reason the Cincinnati Bengals were able to go to 2 back-to-back AFC championship games is not based off of the dominance of the offense. If you look at it, those offensive numbers from those Cincinnati teams, they're in the good half of the NFL, but they're not dominant. They've never been one of the best offenses in the NFL, like you would assume when you hear about all those wide receivers that they got and the best quarterback, or the best quarterback not named Pat Mahomes, as people claim, with Joe Burrow, right? And I'm not slighting any of those guys, but just look at the production. It's never really matched up to what the hype has been, but that's been fine, because what has overmatched its hype is that Bengals defense. That 2021 team that went to the Super Bowl, really, really good defense. A top 10 unit there in Cincinnati. It's a low-key group. There's no giant star on the team, but a really good unit, right? 2021, 2022, Jermaine Pratt, Logan Wilson played really good football. DJ Reader was playing some really good football. Trey Hendrickson playing some solid ball. Sam Hubbard playing some solid ball. You had Cheeto holding it down on one corner spot. You had good safety play. Like you had a really good defense. What fell for Cincinnati this year, and why I think Joe Burrow injury or no Joe Burrow injury, this team was going to struggle more so than they did the last 2 years, is that defense clearly took a step back on this Bengals team. What was the most reliable unit on the team became as unreliable as the offense is at times for Cincinnati. Go look at Cincinnati's numbers. They go 3 and out more than you would think. They don't score on as high a percentage of drives as you would think. What bailed them out was that defense. But when that defense started to get inconsistent, it started to make you notice how inconsistent the offense is. And then all the flaws on the team started to show. So the Bengals made investments, not on the offensive side of the ball, on the defensive side of the ball. And I actually think that's the right way to go. I think they are going to be a much better team than they were last year because of it. Now, will they be back to what they were in 21 and 22? I don't know. But they're going to be a better team than they were in 23. I think Sheldon Rankins is a big move for them. It's a big investment, but I think it's a smart investment, right? You get a defensive tackle in there. You keep a solid defensive line. You have some really good young linebackers. You have some fine corners. And then you brought back Von Bell and you added Geno Stone. And now, you can add that to the rotation with Dax Hill. You could throw Jordan Battle in there rotationally at corner, and now you're fine. Your defense is back to being where it should be, which that's going to be a very fine unit led by one of the best defensive coordinators in the NFL, Lou Anarumo. I think that Cincinnati did a good job here. Now let's talk about this T. Higgins situation. I know we all like to make the memes and the jokes and call Cincinnati broke, because they do kind of kick it like they broke. But this is a situation where the jokes are funny, but at the end of the day, Cincinnati's in a win-win situation. Either they keep T. Higgins on the tag, and they have T. Higgins, which is a big deal. T. Higgins is really good at wide receiver. Or they can't keep T. Higgins on the tag. They trade T. Higgins for significant draft compensation, and Let's be honest. Like we talked about the Ravens not being able to draft wide receivers. If there's been one organization in the NFL that has proven to me that they can draft a wide receiver, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. Just look at the list of guys that they've had since 2000. They've had a ton of wide receivers in Cincinnati. So I'm confident that if they trade T. Higgins, they can turn that into some draft picks that they can use to get somebody who might not replace T. Higgins, but still be very productive because they're not asked to be the number one guy because Jamar Chase is right there. So either way, if they keep T. Higgins, they're going to be a good team. If they get to trade T. Higgins, they're probably going to draft somebody, and they're probably going to be still very good at wide receiver. They also got Joe Burrow, who's getting paid $270 million. We bring this up with Deshaun. We got to bring it up with Joe. Getting paid that much money. Hey, man, I'm sorry. Jamar Chase is enough for you to be successful, right? Like that ought to be enough for you to be successful at 270, right? Over 5. So Cincinnati, I do think they got better. Kansas City. This is going to be real brief. They kept Chris Jones. They got Marquise Brown. Travis Kelce didn't retire. And does Pat Mahomes still play for the Kansas City Chiefs? Yeah, they good. They good. They ain't going nowhere. They good. We ain't got to talk about it no more. All right, let's talk about some of the kind of contenders. Buffalo is a team that they're running it back. And like this, they're such a obvious parallel to the 76ers in the NBA. They're running it back, but we've kind of seen what this team can do. And it's second round exit, right? Josh Allen is great, but Josh Allen has the tendency to make the big mistake. And the quarterback that has the tendency to make the big mistake, that guy has a much more difficult time winning a Super Bowl than the other types of quarterbacks, right? Like you look at the great quarterbacks who have the tendency to make that mistake, the Super Bowl count doesn't match up to what you think about them, right? Peyton Manning won 2. When you think of a guy like Peyton, you think he has like 4 or 5 like Brady, he got 2. Even a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who kind of makes the big mistake, got 1, right? Brett Favre, I believe he has 1, right? You know, you can do it if you're the quarterback that makes a big mistake, but it takes a lot going right, and that's just going to be difficult for the Buffalo Bills in the AFC where the Chiefs exist. And then you got Baltimore, you got Cincinnati, and I think all those teams, if they're operating at their best, are just flat out better than Buffalo. I'm going to leave Cleveland off this list because I've talked about Cleveland enough. This channel covers the Cleveland Browns. If you want to know my thoughts there, we'll do it. This video is already 20-something minutes long. I don't need to make it 45 minutes long, but Cleveland is on this kind of contender tier where they got to prove it. But boy, if things go right, they are contenders, but things can go wrong, they're not. Let's talk about Miami. That was a weird sound I made. Let's talk about Miami. I like that they brought in Jonnu Smith and Jordan Brooks, but they lost Christian Wilkins and Robert Hunt, and I think that's a big deal for them. So I don't know if they got better. I think they stayed about the same. The Jets had a sneaky bad free agency to me. Bringing in Morgan Moses and John Simpson as your answer to the offensive line is just bad. The big move was bringing in Javon Kinlaw, and like I mean, like their defensive line is gonna be fine. They got a really good defensive line, but hey, Javon Kinlaw, is he going? I don't know. Not a big fan of the Jets free agency. Let's talk about the team I think everybody's going to be talking about in the offseason. That's the Houston Texans. I don't love their free agency, but I think this is going to be the team that everybody's going to hype up in this summer because they brought in a lot of names, a lot of new names, but I don't know if they got better. They got Joe Mixon, gave him a bunch of money, but they lost Devin Singletary. I think Devin Singletary's better than Joe Mixon. They're switching out Danielle Hunter with Jonathan Grenard. I think that's about an even move. I know Danielle Hunter puts up good numbers, but effectively, I think they're about the same player. They're both capable of putting up high sack numbers if they get lucky, but I think it requires an extraordinary amount of luck for them to put up those high sack numbers. Like when we're talking about like getting to like 18, 19. And again, sack numbers, not as important as some of the other advanced metrics that we see. And Danielle Hunter is not one of those guys who's going to be at the top. Neither is Jonathan Grenard. So like slight upgrade maybe, but I find it a wash. I think they're doing something that you see a lot of teams do when they have an exciting young quarterback, which is they go out and they shop for name brands. Remember the Browns did this when Baker Mayfield flashed in 18, and then in the 19 offseason, we went brand name shopping. And I always think that that's a mistake. Like at the time when it's happening, you always feel like it's great. It's a good thing. You get excited. You get all these highlight packages, and the fan base loves it. And look, I was in the hype cycle too with Baker Mayfield in that 2019 offseason. But you usually just end up with a lot of buyer's remorse, right? When you got these big names, it's like, okay, well, what they actually do, they come with baggage sometimes, and it just doesn't work out the way that you want it to work out. They made some signings that I like. They brought back Dalton Schultz. I like that. Danico Autry, that's a move that I can get behind. But they also lost Devin Singletary. They lost Blake Cashman. They lost Sheldon Rankings, right? Like they lost some pieces here that I think were significant. They haven't added a wide receiver. I know Tank Dell played well last year, coming off of an injury. I don't know. I don't think that the Texans are going to be a bad team next year. But I think people are expecting the Texans to take a leap similar to what the Lions took last year. I don't know if that's going to be Houston. Again, I think CJ Stroud's great. I think that he can elevate some pieces around him. But I look at this team and I think to myself, this is the same caliber of team that they had last year, just with some bigger names. And it's going to require CJ Stroud elevating them quite a bit to make a leap from how they were perceived last year. And I don't know if CJ Stroud in year 2 is going to be ready for that. I mean, hell, he was in the MVP conversation as a rookie, so he might. But I do think that's a lot to put on a guy coming into his second year in the NFL. Not predicting a disaster. There'll be a playoff team. They're the leaders to win that division. But just something to think about, because I think they're going to get pretty pumped up this year from the media. And I don't know if they're going to be able to deliver on some of the hype there. And I don't want people to turn on CJ Stroud because they went like 10-6 or something like that, right? Like, I think that would be very unfair. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.